You're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Caroline Moderesi-Turani. Now, we all know it's a tough job market out there, but new studies show that your career opportunities might be even more limited if you include religion on your resume, especially if that religion is Muslim. The University of Connecticut conducted a study that found when researchers sent out 3,200 resumes, those who identified as Muslim got 54% fewer phone calls and 38% fewer emails as other faith groups. So joining us now to discuss why your faith might actually harm your future and what the application process is really like for those who associate with Islam, we have Amy Fatima, a social activist and blogger, and Michael Wallace, a sociology professor at the University of Connecticut. So Professor Wallace, I want to start with you if I can. You conducted this study. So just walk us through your research and your findings, and also just kind of tell us a little bit more about it, because Muslim people actually didn't send out resumes themselves, did they? This was all part of a conducted study.
Yes, that's right. We actually did two studies. One was in New England, and one that you referred to was in the southern region of the United States. And basically, we sent out fictional resumes with fictional names on the resumes and sent them to employers who advertised jobs on an employment website. Basically, we made these resumes as even as possible with respect to each other, but they were also, recent college graduates who were high achieving students. And basically, the only thing that we changed of any substance was a line on the resume showing some of their experience at school, which indicated that they had been a member or in a leadership position of a religious organization on campus. So we actually identified 7 different religions: Muslim, Jewish, Catholic, pagan, Catholic, and also a fictitious religion, which we called Wallonian, because we just wanted to see how people would react to something like that.
Right.
And then we also had a control group, so we could compare the different religious groups to the control group in terms of how many responses they got from employers.
So, Professor Wallace, I'm curious, were you shocked by the outcome of the studies? I mean, why do you think that there was such a high percentage of people that were not, sort of into or loath, I suppose, to call that Muslim specifically?
Well, yes, I think we probably anticipated there would be some discrimination based on religious group, but we were surprised at how consistent it was across the different religious groups, and really how high it was, in particular among Muslims. In both regions of the country, Muslims were the group that had the highest rate of discrimination. In other words, they had significantly fewer employers calling them back for job interviews. So we were surprised by the extent of that.
Joining me now on set, we also have Yasmin Hafiz, the Associate Religion Editor here at HuffPost. So nice to see you, Yasmin, as always. So were you shocked when this survey came out? Because I have to say, on Twitter, it seemed like lots of Muslims weren't particularly shocked. Ali Ansari here says, here's why you should take religion, especially Muslim, off your resume. And another tweet here from Haroon Mughal, who said, Muslim name just makes it that much harder to get hired. Were you shocked by the study?
I'm sad to say that I wasn't shocked. Honestly, this has been one of the things that American Muslims have had to deal with since 9/11 is this atmosphere of Islamophobia and general ignorance about the religion. And so it still remains. And I have to say that while things have gotten better for American Muslims, this study does show that American Muslims are one of the most they face the most discrimination out of all of our American faith groups, I would say.
Amy, what do you think about that? I mean, one of our commenters here, Kathy Sandrew, says a reason that my race, ethnicity and gender should be excluded from employment applications. Do you think that's the way forward? Let's just not identify if you are Muslim at all?
Well, as someone who much of my resume is, work on campus for religious groups, interfaith, Muslim. So it gets hard, like applying for jobs. I wish there was blind resume, like you would leave out your name and just give the resume in. But at the same time, someone said to me, if the work you want to do, it has to do with religion and your faith, definitely put it on your resume. And if it isn't, if I was going to apply to be an engineer, I wouldn't put that on my resume. I don't think it has anything to do with me wanting to be an engineer unless, I am showing leadership skills or, being a great like team player, then maybe I would put it on there.
So do you think that if you do add it on there, it becomes something detrimental really to your application? I mean, it seems from Professor Wallace's study that it really is, if you do identify yourself as Muslim in some way on a resume, that it could be detrimental to your hiring prospects.
Definitely. I actually found another version of this study. It was you should leave your religion off the resume unless you're Jewish, and there was another article by Washington Post saying that those who identify as Jewish were getting hired more, which was weird. The article said that it showed that many institutions favor them.
Right.
So I mean, there's also discrimination is very real. I don't know what college students would do if, most of their work is religious-based groups. Like, what do you put on there if that's like half your resume?
I think that's a good point as well, because a lot of this resume kind of building happens at first when you're maybe leaving high school or you're in college, and you're just wanting to kind of cultivate the right kind of resume, because everyone's concerned, they all want to get an equal footing on the job market. Professor Wallace, what do you think about this? I mean, where does this show what does this show in terms of attitudes, I suppose? I mean, does it show that there is some sort of either xenophobia or real discriminatory ideal running through a lot of Americans?
Well, I think there definitely is to some extent. I think some of this, though, is so institutional in nature and it's so ingrained that I think many of the people that are discriminating perhaps are not even aware themselves that they are, or certainly their organizations are not. I would hope not. But on the other hand, I think there are people that look and see and someone that has a Muslim religion and thinks, gee, I don't want them bringing this into the workplace, and for whatever reason, that's a negative to some employers. So, I think it's partly institutional. I think it's partly personal, and people are doing it very intentionally.
Well, this is really striking a chord with a lot of people in our comments. I've got one here from Andrew Gerald Yu, who says, I actually feel the same when I have to de-black my own. Yasmin, what do you think about that? It might not necessarily just be Muslims that are affected, but it's a swathe of the American population that feels that they have to somehow modify themselves in order to get ahead.
Absolutely. And in an ideal world, hiring would be totally blind. You wouldn't know a person's religion, or if you knew it, it wouldn't make a difference. But sadly, that's not the way it works in today's America. Your race does matter. Your religion matters. And I think my message to Muslim teenagers, especially like Aini, who, as she says, her work is in Islam. She shouldn't have to hide it. So I think that, yes, there is a bias, but no one should be hiding a part of their identity on their resume.
Where do you think the Muslim problem, I guess, comes from in particular? Where's the root of this? Because I feel like maybe if you went back 30, 40 years in America, it might not have been as inflammatory as the word Muslim Islam is today. Where do you think that's coming from?
I think 9/11 was just a watershed. Every American Muslim of my generation my brother says that he went to bed on September 10th an American, and he woke up on September 11th as a Muslim. Why has this part of our identity been so blown up? I haven't changed personally.
Right. So it's just a small minority. Professor Wallace, what about that? I mean, is there a way, have you seen this in any of the research that you've done as kind of like this was a watershed moment? Was 9/11, is it still lingering in the consciousness of many Americans when it comes to identifying Muslims as something you don't want to necessarily associate with, you don't necessarily want to hire?
Yes, I think that's right. The 9/11 certainly had something to do with it. However, we're 13 years removed from that, and it seems to still be having an impact. There's actually a couple of theories in sociology that explain discrimination against minority groups. And one of them is called group threat theory. And that argument is that when you have a group out there that is threatening to the status quo, and the larger it is in particular, the more people fear it. But there's another theory called contact theory, which basically says when people have contact with people of minority groups, they become familiar with them, they become tolerant of them, and they become less threatened by them. And I think to a large extent, it's the fact that many people in American society still do not have a lot of personal contact with Muslims. And as a result of this, they view them as something of the other. And in that regard, something to be feared, something about the unknown. And as a result, they tend not to hire them.
Well, I want to read this other comment here. This is from Tirana, who says, post 9/11 world is tough on American Muslims, but I thought that the general HR rules and regulations in the US made it clear that companies cannot discriminate based on gender, religion, and race. Why should I hide my religion in that case? Amy, what do you think about that?
Well, recently this past quarter, we read a book called Thomas Jefferson's Quran, and it's like, I think the whole class, I think anyone would find it surprising that Islam and Muslims have been here in America since the beginning. And to exclude us based on religion is highly unconstitutional. And I feel like I shouldn't have to hide it. Like, my religion would not affect my work ethic. And I know that probably companies would be like, oh, well, they're going to bring up a lawsuit, or they're going to ask for more days off, or they're like all these things about our like religion, like all these misconceptions that, aren't necessarily they aren't true. And I shouldn't have to, no one should have to leave their religion outside of their their job. Like, that shouldn't be a factor.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who's a young person, does it make you nervous? Does it make your friends nervous to, be going out in the working world as a Muslim woman? And, does this sort of study make you concerned for your own job prospects?
Yeah, I mean, I've lost job opportunities because of my hijab. Even if they hadn't said it directly, I've seen people who have less experience and less, credentials get a job because they weren't Muslim or they weren't wearing a hijab. And it's unfortunate because I know that I'm capable of doing these things, and so many of my peers are. But because of one thing on your paper where it says Muslim or Islam anywhere on it, the employer gets completely freaked out. And for us, it's hard because we grow up in communities where, they're pushing us to, get involved. And that's what our work is. That's where our experience starts. So what do you do? What is the other option? What do you change those words to? Religious group on campus, or
right.
What do you change it to?
It's a great point, Amy. I mean, Yasmin, what do you think about that? The fact that Amy was talking about the hijab and how that can be a marker for some employers as a no-go. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it goes back to what Professor Wallace was saying about contact theory. And the more American Muslims that are able to practice their faith publicly while doing a wide variety of jobs, whether it's the media, whether it's law, whether it's medicine, the more visible American Muslims you have, the less scary this will be. And I'd like to believe that most of this discrimination is sort of unconscious, but, Professor Wallace's study is pretty sadly compelling.
Yeah.
Those findings, they're pretty stark.
Absolutely.
And so American Muslims just need to put themselves out there and become less unfamiliar.
I think it's a really good point as well. I just want to read a couple more tweets before we have to wrap. This one from Paul Rauschenbusch, who's our HuffPost senior religion editor, and he says, unfortunately, these people are not getting jobs because they are AWM applying while Muslim. I have another one here from Wajat Ali, who says, wonderful, I'll be a pre-partition Indian monotheist. Muslim, don't put it on your resume. And then this final comment from Jared Willis, who says, all minorities have a PhD in walking on eggshells. Trying to seem less of a minority is an entry-level class on that degree path. And it's, I think it's a very poignant statement. But I want to thank you so much, Yasmin, for joining me on set, and Amy and Professor Wallace. Thanks so much for joining me today on HuffPost Live to discuss this issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And guys, be sure to click on the links in our resource world below to read more of the study. And stay with us, there is much more coming up on HuffPost Live next.